In this lesson, we're going to wrap up our look at the client against the RESTful Bus Tracker service from the Chicago Transit Authority. You're looking at the working file CTA Bus Tracker 3.txt. The full source code, bustracker.java, is also included among the working files. Let me get to it very quickly. There's a base URL, you see this next to the cursor, against which all of the requests are going to be made. I'm going to make 3 of them for demo purposes, and they occur down in this private method called demo, and each of the requests is marked with a comment to the right. So the first request, you see the full URL, so it's the base URL plus get time, that's the particular service, plus key, and that's my CTA API key that's entered as a command line argument. Make request is then called. Make request also receives the response. We'll see that in a second. The second demo involves the get vehicle service. This provides the richest information. It basically gives a list of all of the CTA buses, tells you where they are, if they're under repair, if they're out on their routes, and so forth. So it provides a wealth of information. This is perfect for data analysis, where you're doing a study, for example, of this sort of thing. And then the final demo, down at line 3, checks out a particular route. All of the information is passed into the CTA service as query string key value pairs. Now, the make request method down here uses one of my favorite utility classes in Java, the URL connection. You see that at line 4. This is ideally suited for RESTful clients. It opens up a connection, you can send a request, receive the response, the API is straightforward, and we've seen this class used a couple of times before. Way down here at line 5, there's a while loop which reads the response from the CTA service. It comes in as chunks of XML, and the while loop simply puts this together to wind up with one big XML document. In this particular demo, I do nothing but print that document, but in a client that I use for going to and coming back from work, I just use a very simple XML parse to extract the information that I need. What I'm going to do is switch working files. This is now restsummary.txt, because now is a good time to wrap up what we've seen. We've seen a couple of clients against a fairly complicated RESTful service. That, of course, is the Amazon e-commerce service. And we've seen a client against a relatively simple, straightforward service, and that's the CTA bus tracking service. Let me use that as a springboard to provide an overview. One of the real challenges of REST is that there are no standards. There are accepted practices, and folks that provide RESTful services provide those practices to some degree or other. For a programmer on the client side, this can be frustrating. There is good news. Virtually all services nowadays provide at least an XML schema or the equivalent. XML schema is not the only game in town. There's RelaxNG, there's Schematron. There are other ways to provide a grammar for an XML payload, but XML schema remains the default. So with an XML schema, as we saw in the Amazon case, we can use Java's XJC utility to create Java classes that then allow us to use JAX-B so that we can avoid explicit XML parsing. Very nice. On the downside, the XML schemas that you get from different services vary widely. So, for example, Amazon has its own, eBay, Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, and so on. So there's no standardization across these XML schemas for RESTful services. The big question for all of us as programmers, I think, is this. When you're writing RESTful clients, how are you going to handle the payload that comes back, assuming that it's XML? This is the question of whether to parse explicitly using a DOM parse or an XPath-based parse, which is a variant of a DOM parse, or to go to JAX-B in order to avoid dealing with XML at all. My view is that for very simple services, for me the CTA service is a perfect example of that, a straightforward parse is not a bad way to go. It's not that complicated. There's not that much information that you normally need to extract from the response payload. For something bigger, and I'm thinking here, of course, of Amazon, it seems to me that the jack speed technologies really do pay off. Much easier, I think, to work in Java to extract information than to work in XML. In any case, this wraps up our look at clients against RESTful services, that is, RESTful services that respond with XML. What we're going to do in the next lesson is start to look at JavaScript clients against RESTful services.